Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Psycho, and I'm back with another Walking Dead video, and this one is going to be over a very interesting subject. It's going to be about, will Negan kill Daryl instead of Glenn? And I know at first, as soon as you guys hear me state this, you're thinking, Psycho, come on now, we've explored this theory multiple times, and it's most likely not going to happen. However, although this is a good point, and the signs are pointing to Glenn, I do want to mention all sides of the argument. That's one thing that I do want to do on my channel, and that is to show all sides. I don't like leaning to one side and not exploring the other side, because exploring every single crevice of every single subject is what I love doing. I love always coming up with these wild theories, even though they might not come true. It's really interesting to explore, and these wild theories usually do have to have some sort of validity, or I just wouldn't explore them at all. Now, to me, the idea of Negan actually killing Daryl is not that wild to think about. Before I start discussing this and giving some examples of reasoning, I would like to say that I am going to involve some comic book spoilers and the details of what happened in the most recent episode. I just want to warn you guys because I don't want anything spoiled for you all if you don't want it to be spoiled. I definitely know how that feels. Now, first I want to start off with a very important bit of reasoning that does have some likelihood, and I do want to say that right now it seems as if Glenn is going to be the one to take the bat, but we do want to explore this other side here. My first bit of reasoning really involves what happened in the recent episode. Now, a lot of people were extremely surprised, including myself, about what happened in this last episode. Now, it seemed as if they were setting up Abraham's comic book death. They were aligning everything perfectly, and then all of a sudden, a train wreck just goes straight through that line, messes it all up, and mind blows everyone. And that mind blow is where Denise takes Abraham's death. And I know a lot of people were extremely surprised about this, including myself, because it seemed as if everything was lining up perfectly for Abraham to take that spot. And I'm going to say I was predicting that it was going to be Tara instead of Abraham, but they set up everything so specifically and perfectly for it to look as if Abraham was going to take the death. For example, just how Sasha said she was taking off the runs with Abraham and that Eugene was going to replace her, just like in the comics when Abraham and Eugene go out and Dwight shoots him through the eye with an arrow. All of this was setting up perfectly and pointing to the idea that Abraham's death was coming soon. However, they surprised us by throwing us through a loop, and I want to give them a lot of props on that simply because they surprised many people and even the comic book readers. It's definitely awesome to see that Abraham is going to live another day, and we can get more funny lines like Bisquick. Now that I have explained this, I want to connect it back to the reasoning I was talking about earlier. As you can see, if we think about all of this death foreshadowing with Abraham and it actually not being Abraham's death, we can connect this over to Glenn's death foreshadowing. Throughout the series, they have been extremely dedicated to pointing that Glenn's death will be by Negan, specifically throughout all of these scenes, such as at Terminus with the baseball bat, such as when we went to Noah's home place, where Glenn picks up another baseball bat, and the latest point where he views all of the Lucille death pictures on the wall in the episode titled Not Tomorrow Yet. So as we can see, there is a ton of foreshadowing here, just like there was a lot of foreshadowing to Abraham's death, in which it happened in the comics as well, just like a lot of people think that Glenn's death is going to be true to the comics. Now, if we connect these together, and if we consider the fact that AMC and the show's creators might use this strategy consistently throughout the last few episodes of this season, it points to the idea that it could possibly not be Glenn, and it would throw readers and TV show viewers for a loop, simply because it is something that has been foreshadowed so much to where we don't even think that any other death could be possible. They have been setting up Maggie's leadership role at Hilltop. They have been setting up all of these things to where it seems like nothing can go astray. It has to be Glenn. And just like Abraham's death that did not happen, it could be Glenn's death that does not happen either, and Daryl could take his place. Now, specifically, why would I say Daryl? Why couldn't it be another character? Daryl is a beloved character throughout the whole series, and he has become Rick's right-hand man. In the TV show, from a male point of view, Rick's main man is Daryl. I wouldn't say that it is Glenn, I would say that it's Daryl. As we saw in the last episode titled The Next World, we saw this friendship develop between Rick and Daryl that is constantly developing throughout the whole series. For example, back in Season 4 when Daryl and Rick have their experience with the Claimers, they finally take care of them, and then Rick tells Daryl he is his brother. Now, a lot of people will say that Darrell's death wouldn't drive the story like Glenn's would, and that is definitely a good point. But the show is simply not built around a death changing everything. And if we do want to think in a different point of view, Darrell's death would have a huge impact on Carol and Rick, and those are some major characters in the show, and their impacts could change the show overall as well. It could change overall attitudes about everything, and that still doesn't mean that it's not going to affect Glenn or Maggie. It's really going to affect Glenn simply because Daryl and Glenn have had some friendship interaction throughout the series as well. I could still see it playing out as it does in the comics, even if Daryl does die. Now that I have discussed this, I want to say why Daryl could possibly die. Even though a lot of people think that he is AMC's cash cow and he's an unkillable character, I want to point out the fact that Robert Kirkman has said in the past, and still says this, that no character is safe on the show. In a recent interview, very recent, Gail Ann Hurd, one of the producers of the show, actually said that no one was safe as well, and this just reiterates the point that anyone can die. Anyone. And I cannot express this enough. For this show to show us that it is about survival, they have to show us that any character can die, no one is safe, everyone is going to have slip-ups, and sometimes these characters are going to face other people that they cannot overcome. To add on to this even more, Steven Yeun, the actor who plays as Glenn Rhee in the TV show, he recently stated that the show constantly remixes deaths, and he talked about how he was so excited about Negan, and he emphasized the fact that there has been a lot of remixes when it comes to death on the TV show. Now, this is certainly a good point, and it interestingly contradicts what happened in the episode titled Not Tomorrow Yet, where Glenn is foreshadowed dying by looking at the Lucille death pictures on the wall. And I just find it very interesting that Steven Yeun would outright say that they remixed these deaths. And if you do want to argue the other way, it is a good point. He could just be trying to mislead viewers and readers simply because they don't want it to be too obvious. In addition, there are some other readers that do say, oh well, Daryl Dixon's stuntman has already confirmed that he's coming in Season 7, and Daryl Dixon has confirmed in an interview that he will be returning for Season 7. However, you cannot always take these things as what they are on the surface. Norman Reedus recently, I think it was last summer, in an interview, Norman Reedus stated what would happen to Glenn. They asked him what is the most shocking death in this season, and he reveals that it was Glenn. People got really worked up over this, and then finally we got to the moment in the TV show, and we saw that Glenn actually did, quotation marks, die. And then later on, a few episodes, we see that he is alive. And you can take this interview as a way to mislead, and not really manipulate, but mislead the fans into thinking that Glenn is actually going to die, and we're all looking forward to that moment. And when we see it, we believe it because we've heard that before it was shown. Now, to me, Norman Reedus already knew that he was going to live, but he wanted to put this out there, and I do feel like maybe the producers wanted him to do this, and they directed his words to say that. This is just another example of how you can connect it back to this interview where Norman Reedus states that he will be returning, in which he actually might not be. It's honestly what I would do as an actor. I would want to surprise all of these people by misleading them, and then they would appreciate that misleading because it surprised them and it surprised every single viewer, and they would appreciate the fact that I went out of my way to hide this truth. Just to address one more thing, a lot of people are afraid that if Daryl Dixon does die on the show, there will be viewers that stop watching. However, in my opinion, I do think that a lot of people say that they will stop watching, but in reality, they will tune in next week to see what happens. It's not about Daryl Dixon, it's about The Walking Dead. It's about every single character, not only Daryl Dixon. And to me, if you are a fan of the true show, you're not only a fan of Daryl Dixon, but you're a fan of what happens to all of these characters as a cohesive group. And just to add on to that, big character deaths, you can see it in Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is an extremely popular show, and major characters die all of the time. So, considering this correlation, you would think by what people say about Daryl Dixon dying on The Walking Dead and how they would stop watching, You would think that that would connect over to Game of Thrones of people saying the same as well. But as you can see, people continue to watch just to see what happens to the other characters. And one more thing, big character deaths add in a lot of viewership, and you can look up any statistic chart online, there are many out there, that do show what happens when a major character dies on The Walking Dead. And often what happens is, it reaches this point, and then all of a sudden it shoots up to a peak in viewership. And that shows that when someone sees someone die on The Walking Dead, they tune in next week to see what happens because they know it's getting crazy. This would definitely be a good move to add more viewership to the show as well, but not only to add viewership, but to create this character known as Negan as the biggest villain in The Walking Dead. Now, Jeffrey Dean Morgan does have a big role to fill on this show, and one way to make his character known as Negan an even bigger villain, to kill Daryl Dixon would be one of the biggest deaths not only in The Walking Dead, but in TV show history. And there are interviews with many other actors in The Walking Dead who state that this is going to be the biggest moment and the biggest death in Walking Dead and TV show history. And if you don't believe me, the proof is out there, just go and look up some interviews from the cast. To be honest, Daryl Dixon, as the huge character that he is, if he doesn't die by Negan, what other way is he going to go out? To me, if he doesn't die by Negan, he's not going to die ever, simply because Negan has the biggest kill in Walking Dead history. I just can't think of any way that Daryl Dixon could go out in any other memorable moment like this. It's the most iconic death in history, and as an actor, if I was going to go out, I would definitely want to go out with a bang with this death. As always, I really do appreciate you all watching, and if you disagree with me, it's fine, it's completely fine, but I do want to ask that you are polite to other people and to all of us in this Walking Dead community I have built here. If you do want to discuss it in the comments, feel free to do so. I love interacting with all of you all and discussing different things. So as always, thanks again guys, peace out.